I'm Riley. I love movies, so let's talk Jumanji the Next Level. So in order to talk about this one, we have to talk about Jumanji the first one. And when I first saw the trailer for that one back in 2017, I wasn't too excited, but I wasn't disappointed. I saw Jack Black was in it, and anything he's in, like, I'm there to see, right? And then you have that dynamic between The Rock and Kevin Hart. So what was great about this sequel is not only did they bring all those people back, Karen Gillan, Jack Black, like I mentioned, Kevin Hart, they've added the two Dannys, Danny DeVito and Danny Glover, and then you have Awkwafina and Nick Jonas is back. So you have this world that they fleshed out in their new Jumanji as the video game, right? And now they're expanding it, which is cool. However, when you do something like that, sometimes people can get lost, and in order to set this one up with all the body swapping back and forth and stuff, as you've seen, hopefully by now you've seen in the trailer, right? You can kind of maybe get lost, I guess, in all the switching that's happening, because like most things, a lot of the good parts are in the trailer, but this movie was just funny overall. Like it's kept that same humor from the first one to this one, which is awesome. Like that's what you want to see. Oh, sweater check, look. One of my favorites. So you have all those things that much made the first one, in my opinion, pretty great. You had the comedy, there was the action, just the interaction of the characters and them like figure out their avatar bodies and things like that. So it carries into this one, except you have these older men in these like younger, more fit bodies. So Milo Walker, who is the old man, Danny Glover's character, is now in Kevin Hart's body, and he does his voice drawl and the slow talking so well. Like you almost wonder if he did the voice acting for him, which he didn't, and then Dwayne does Braveheart, as Danny DeVito. And them themselves have this like back and forth situation which they set up in the beginning. So this movie it takes a little bit longer to get started. The first Jumanji, you kind of just like jumped all in and you were ready to go. Like they set up the characters. This one took a little bit longer because not only are you having to bring the four main kids back because they're all scattered around at different colleges and things like that, living their best lives, except for Spencer, the nerdy one in the first one is also just kind of lost in this one too. They're all coming back home for winter break, so you have to set all that up, and then you're setting up the, Danny DeVito's character and Danny Glover's character as them like who are friends but haven't spoken in like 15 years. So in order to set all this up, it takes a little bit longer, and there's not as much, I guess, action or funny things happening in that part. That's what happens when you have to set up the story to like knock it down later. And that's what they do, is they're building you up to this point to when they're back in the game. And then once they get back in the game, like you hit the ground running, right? They land in Jumanji, like the Jumanji we're familiar with, the ones we're all excited, we're like, yes, they're back in the jungle, and funny stuff happens, and then they're quickly whisked away like to the desert, and then they go to an oasis, and then they end up in the mountains with the snow, and they have to climb this huge thing, and it's like, whoa, and you're already going, yes, 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 like all this action. But at the same time, it keeps the heart of like the story and these characters who are truly just kids and old men in the bodies of these avatars. So yes, you're getting all this craziness happening, but you're getting the coolness and like a good story, I think is what it is. Because sometimes you wonder with things like this, with like all the body swapping, and I'll talk more about that later, but if there's stories gonna be there, because you need something to be able to pull these pieces together and keep you like going along with it, versus you being like, when's this over, like checking your watch and things like that. So here we are, you got all your cast set up, you're pretty sure who's who. They land in the jungle and you're excited, right? They're back where they started, and Martha, who's the Ruby Roundhouse character, thinks she's found Spencer, and as you see, it's not Spencer. You find out it's the grandparents in these bodies, and them adapting to their bodies and trying to figure out their strengths and weaknesses is funny. But at the same time, like, it's kind of overplayed a little bit in this movie, but it is one of those things where, like, as all comedy movies usually have, is like a running gag throughout, and that's kind of these old men in these avatars, which is funny. But there's a point where it's like Kevin Hart's character Mouse is supposed to be the one that can talk about animals being dangerous and things like that, and Milo Walker, who's Danny Glover, talks very slow, and it takes him forever to get to the point, and by the time he gets to the point, people are dying. And so in the first one, when it took a while for them to lose their lives, you know, the 3 lives on their arms, this one they're losing lives left and right, and now they're all pretty much down to 1, and it's like crunch and go time, you know? So that's interesting because it puts you more on a little bit of an edge, wondering like, well, if someone gonna die, because now they all only have 1 life, and even though the game is glitching, they don't know if they die in the game if they still die, right? Like, it's still one of those things where it's up in the air, and you're just assuming if you die in the game, you die, right? So they're all worried because now they all have 1 life from dying from ridiculous things because he couldn't tell you that the baboons were poisonous fast enough, or all these kinds of things. And it's just like, get to the point. So that's part of it. Is you find out later the reason why Spencer went back is because he was struggling in school. Like, he had finally made friends, and last year was perfect, you know, after the end of the first Jumanji, and then this year he's in a new school with nobody, and he feels alone. And you find out later, okay, spoilers from now on, right? He's the one who broke up with Martha, because they kind of make you think slow throughout it, like she's the one, because she went to college and was popular and all this kind of stuff, and her friends call her M, you know, things like that. Like, it's because he wasn't confident enough. He wanted to be Bravestone again and get that confidence and feel that strength and things like that. But then he comes back as Ming, who is Awkwafina's character, who is a thief and a lockpick and some other skill around, like that kind of thing. But since they're in these avatars that aren't their original ones, they all don't know how to do their character, right? Because they're so used to their characters from before. So about halfway through the movie, when they're in the Oasis, you see Karen Gillan, who is Ruby Brown House, and Mouse, who is Fridge. They are trying to get this berry thing, like the Jumanji berry, which is important later, which of course it is, you know, like why else would you have 100-pound like berry? And she does this cool stuff, and the water is like sparkly and green, and she lands in it, and she can't get out because she's holding this heavy berry. So Moose, well, that's what he wanted to be called, right? Mouse goes to pick her up, Kevin's Hart character, and then they shock each other, and then you see them switch bodies. So that's when they realize, like, this sparkly green water stuff can help them switch bodies. And then he's all excited because he's been, you know, in this Kevin Hart's body, who in the game is like kind of useless, you know, can't really do a whole lot. He's not athletic or anything. Wait, no, not Kevin Hart's body. Sorry. Darn. Jack Black's body the whole time. Why did I think that? Because he's the one who's like this most useless character in the video game, right? So he can't do anything, and he tries to get him to stay fit, and then he like dies, like, you know, because he can't do it. So they switch bodies, and they end up switching bodies back. And this is a point where it gets not necessarily too confusing, but there's a point where there's just too much body swapping happening, and even though you know and you're following along and you visually can see it and hear it, at the same time I can see people around me getting a little bit confused with all the swapping that's going around, because they talk about it, but if you weren't really firm on the characters in the beginning, or maybe even haven't seen the first Jumanji, it's gonna be a lot. There's a lot of body swapping that happens, which is funny and interesting and cool to see them all play these different characters. Like, it gives the actors some stretch and growth and reach for them, which is cool then to see them play other characters that we've seen and loved, right? But at the same time, it's just a little too much of that. Like, it's one of those things, like I was saying earlier, where it's a running gag throughout this movie, but it was a little too much, you know? So they finally end up swapping back to pretty much their original characters. Like, Bethany ended up being a horse, you know, but she went back and found Alex, who was Nick Jonas's avatar. She went and found him and convinced him to help her get into the game, and then it ends up with Milo, who is Danny Glover's character, as the horse, and then you have Ming is now Danny DeVito, and then the 4 kids are all back in their original bodies, and they're good at it. So that's how they end up saving the day, is they're back in their original bodies. They know what they need to do, well, their avatar bodies, you know, to save the day. And then the whole time you're wondering, like, what's the point of a horse? Like, the horse avatar isn't helpful. And you see when the horse is getting rescued because he was caught, that they press his chest, but they don't show you what his skill is. And he's like, oh, that's awesome. So you immediately think this is going to be helpful later, right? And of course it is, because then it turns out the horse can fly, and that's how they get the stone to the sun, and they can all call out Jumanji and go home. So overall, like, if you love the first one, I think you're gonna like this one. If you haven't seen the first one, I recommend seeing the first one before this one, because there's little things in there that'll help you pay more attention and understand what's happening. And it's just one of those things where you know what you're getting into, right? Like, it's a big action, like, comedy adventure starring The Rock, Kevin Hart, Jack Black. Like, you know it's not gonna be the most like superb, intense kind of drama acting from certain actors. Like, you know what you're getting into, and it's fine because it's enjoyable and it's cool to watch and it's funny and it gets you going and you get excited because they're going to all these new places. Like, it was a good continuation. And there is an after the credits scene, which isn't too far after, but it shows Spencer's mom down there with the fix-it guy, and then they don't show you getting sucked in the game, you just have to imagine, but then the 4 kids are coming out of this diner and ostriches run by. So Jumanji is now in their world. So yep, we're gonna get a 3rd one, but I'm down to see it. Hope you like this. Bye.